Chapter 9 of Psychopomp Drive. Written by Janeen Leese-Taylor. Read aloud by Skya. Chapter 9 Smoke and Empathy. The outside world was just as he had left it. The smell of petrichor hung in the air, fresh and vibrant and alive. The colors of the city seemed to glow in the moonlight beneath them, the street lights glistening like far-off stars in a sheet of black. Finley eyed the next building warily, watching as the other Amorini glided from one rooftop to the next with ease. Their movements, like those of the cat that led them, were smooth as fluid, graceful as smoke. He made his way to the edge of the building, feeling the cold, damp cement under his shoes as he peered down through the blackness to the ground below. He felt adrenaline rush into his legs at the sight, although they were only 6 or 7 floors from the ground. Being on the outside of the building made the fall a far more terrifying prospect. He swallowed, raising his head to watch the rest of the spirits as they disappeared into the night. Only one figure lingered behind to wait for him. The tall, thin shadow of Reichardt Griffith, just about visible, standing ahead of him. The man raised his head, the light catching on the round windows of his glasses. "Are you quite all right, Finn?" he called back. Finley hesitated, drawing back from the sharp drop again. Not really." He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "I've never been the biggest fan of heights." The shadow tilted its head, and Finley could picture the man's smooth and gentle smile there in the dark. "There is nothing to fear, Finley. You are not human anymore," he soothed. "The foe can no longer kill you. You are already décédé." "Tell that to my brain and feet," the silver-haired Amorini rebuked, giving his companion a nervous half-laugh. "Honestly, even getting close to that edge is making me want to throw up." Reichardt breathed out a quiet chuckle. "Now wouldn't that be a sight?" he remarked. He came back towards him, jumping the gap between the two buildings with such ease that he hadn't even removed his hands from his trouser pockets. He landed with the softness of a cat's paws and extended a single hand towards him. "The first time is always the most difficult. You just have to push through it. Your brain still thinks that you are alive. It is trying to protect you." "So you're saying it's just a mental block?" Finley arched an unsure eyebrow in his direction. Reichardt gave him a small, polite nod. "Your new body is more than capable of clearing this distance." Finley peered down over the edge again. "If you say so." His tone was doubtful. "I know so," the taller man countered. "Come on, take my hand. I'll show you." Finley eyed him skeptically, but reached out for him regardless. He was surprised when he found the man's hands were warm. "Okay," he breathed. "I think I can do this." "Oui, you can." Finley's nerve endings came alive as Reichardt darted for the perimeter of the building, and he felt his own legs being pulled along with him as if on autopilot. The ground vanished from beneath his feet as he was pulled skywards. lightning coursing through every inch of his body, like he was linked to a jump cable. For a moment, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath, time slowing to allow them to descend with feather-like weightlessness. When Finley's feet hit the second rooftop, he stumbled forward, a shuddering laugh falling from his lips in relief. He glanced back, eyes widening at the enormity of the gap. Did we seriously just... He gasped, turning to grin at his companion. That was awesome! I felt like a freaking superhero! Reichardt smiled back and patted his shoulder affectionately. Those are capable of so much more than our human bodies were, Finn. Your previous limitations do not apply in the realm of the in-between. He turned to walk ahead, making each of the following leaps as quickly and as effortlessly as a cat might. Finley chased after him on the balls of his feet, launching himself through the air with each new chasm, feeling as though the wind itself were propelling him upwards on its current. Dopamine exploded through his neurons like a bright star shattering in space. He felt like a child again, his body light and powerful, and he let out a loud cheer on the apex of each jump. You are going to give us away, Reichardt scolded playfully. The young man before him practically glowed with excitement. Salo said the living can only see us if we speak directly to them, he countered breathlessly, unable to keep the smile from his face. The first Amorini shook his head, unable to fight back his own smile. There is certainly no reasoning with you, is there? Nope, Finley replied, and rushed ahead, bouncing through the air with a loud echo of woohoo! Whenever he landed, he called back to the older spirit, beckoning him with a hand. Come on, Reich, live a little! Reichardt moved to argue with the sentiment. After all, they were dead. But something about the light glistening in the other man's eyes made him hold his tongue. Instead, he rushed across the next rooftop and focused on the feeling of his own momentum, basking in the powers that his body now had in death. He hadn't really allowed himself to focus on such things, to really pay attention to how his body was feeling in that moment. It was exhilarating. At the apex of the jump, he threw back his head and let out a loud cheer into the night sky, feeling the energy of the shout coursing through him. When he landed, he felt his face flush, and he tucked the feeling away again, adjusting his glasses on his slender face as he cleared his throat. Come on, Master Evans, he said. We mustn't keep the others waiting. That only made the new Amarini's grin widen. You had fun, he noted. Reichardt turned his head away, trying to hide the flush that had moved up to heat his face. Yes, well. He cleared his throat again. Finley nudged against his side, teasingly, as he walked ahead, his breathing only beginning to settle when they caught up to the other four spirits. Salo stood before them on the raised lip of the rooftop, looking down towards the park below with perked ears. His tail was raised to attention, his whiskers glistening in the moonlight. Alvaro Carlson stood next to him, both hands buried deep in his baggy trouser pockets for warmth. A cigarette hung from the corner of his mouth, the white tail of it flapping as he muttered something under his breath. The tiny ember it produced made the white fur of his curly mustache glow like fire. Sharp blue eyes narrowed in Finley's direction as he grinned around his cigarette.
Having fun, were you, broke macla?
Finley settled in next to him, feeling his cat-like ears heat up at the man's tone.
Sorry for keeping you guys. We were just...
It was Finley's first time jumping rooftops, Reichardt interjected. He met the younger spirit's eyes and gave him a conspiratory look.
We were just appreciating the view.
Alvaro snorted.
I'm glad someone is having a good time. Waiting for this hollow to show up is like watching paint dry.
There it is. Salo's deep voice cut through the silence of the evening.
To the left of the gardens.
The cat was standing again, his head angled downwards towards the tree cover.
A whisperer has latched on to that joker. Do you see them?
Finley came to stand next to them, leaning over the precipice to examine the park below. Through the foliage, he could just about see the bouncing red of the woman's running shirt. His eyes widened as she came into view, her body bright under the glow of a street light. Attached to her right shoulder was a long, black shape. Snake-like, it coiled around her, the edges breaking apart and reforming like putrid smoke. Though the pool of its body did not weigh her down physically, the human appeared aware of something intruding on her space. She glanced back into the darkness with every few steps, as if she were running away from something. Her movements twitchy and frantic like a hunted animal. Finley tilted his head to one side as he watched her.
Can she see it?
He asked. He felt the solar systems of Salo's eyes on him.
No,
he answered.
Whisperers do not have a physical presence of any kind. What she is likely experiencing is the residual fear that the hollow gives off. Its voice will create doubt, make her feel as though she is in constant danger. Amplify the tiny voice in her head until it drowns out all other thoughts. She'll become afraid and paranoid. It will feed off the pain and the adrenaline her body gives off, breaking her down over time until there is nothing left but that fear. Unlike whisker reptiles, it can take several weeks for whisperers to embed themselves fully in their victims. This one has not been here for long. We only received notice of it stalking the area earlier today,
Reichardt surmised.
So, what do we do?
Finley asked. Alvaro reached up a hand to pull something from the sheath on his back, grinning as the hammer came down to rest in his opposite palm. His cigarette butt fell forgotten to his feet.
Ray, go down there and take out the shovel!
Finley's ears perked upwards.
But what about the runner? What if she gets caught up in all this?
You don't have to worry, Reichardt supplied calmly. She won't even be aware of us. Reapers are designed to only strike the hollows inside and leave living flesh unharmed.
For tonight, you are just to observe,
Salo instructed, watching as Reichardt pulled out his twin blades and wrapped their red fabric around his hands.
Reichardt and Alvaro will demonstrate what is required of you. You must hang back and keep out of reach of the hollow. Do you understand?
The younger man nodded his head, feeling the coils of anxiety curling around in his own gut.
Stay out of harm's way. Oh yeah, I think I can manage that.
The black cat nodded his head,
walking along the edge of the rooftop again. I will continue my patrol in the city center and will meet you back at Psychopomp Drive within the hour. He raised his head to sniff the air before adding, Be safe and look out for each other. Scrappy, you and Abby are only to take action if it is required. Is that understood?
Got it, boss man, Abby acknowledged, leaning back against the brick chimney next to her. She saluted him with 2 fingers on her right hand. See you in 60. Scrappy nodded their agreement, folding further into themselves wordlessly. They were dressed in warm winter layers, a thick scarf wrapped tightly around their neck. The NB looked like they might nod off at any moment. The Grim hopped up towards the brick structure, curling around its rough edges.
Best of luck, then.
With a last flurry of dark fur, the animal disappeared into the night, leaving no evidence of his existence behind. Finley followed suit, dropping down onto the balcony below and hopping from one spot to the next with an agility he was not quite used to. A flower pot wobbled as he passed, and he reached out a hand to hold it steady, swearing quietly under his breath.
The others make it look so damn easy,
he observed as he clung to the edge of the wooden balcony, the knuckles of both hands growing white with strain. He spotted Reichardt to his left and mimicked the man's final descent, landing just behind him on the cobblestones with a soft uttering of "Oof!" hands out to keep his balance. This early in the morning there were very few people out on the streets of Chester. The smell of freshly made bread and bacon wafted from the Little Owl Cafe across the road, the sun's golden fingers brushing across the small wooden bird statue that looked set to take off from its doorway. Fairy lights, long since extinguished by the early hour, hung lifeless from the sides. They danced in the breeze, tinking as they tapped against the painted blue edges of the paintwork. The Countess of Chester Country Park sat on the corner of Mollington Grange Golf Club, a quiet rectangular patch of green carved off for the nearby hospital. The walkways were crafted with smooth stone and well maintained, the grass lush and green and dripping with morning dew. Amongst the cluster of dark leaves, the shape of the runner stood out clearly in her choice of bright attire. As the Amorini trudged through the long fringes of uncut grass, Finley began to make out the shrill whistling of her headphones, the low and familiar bass of something upbeat, creating a rhythm that matched her natural cadence. Her blonde hair, tied in a loose ponytail, poked out through the small opening in the back of her orange baseball cap. The thin cables that linked her headphones to the mobile phone on her arm rattled against the pink plastic casing. Reichardt came to a stop to his right and reached out a hand to halt his progress.
"Stay here,"
he instructed, and Finley nodded, kneeling down into the grass to watch the pair continue forward.
"Shall we try Tactic 27?
Alvaro asked with a grin as he took hold of his hammer. His short silver hair fluttered in the wind coming off the grass.
"We certainly have plenty of space for it,"
Reichardt answered, drawing his own weapons.
"After you, Monsieur Carson."
Alvaro spun the large, wide head of his hammer, using its momentum to spring towards the moving target. Reichardt darted after him, his footfalls light and barely distinguishable from the other sounds in the park. Finley sat up as he watched the bulk of Alvaro's weapon pass right through the body of the runner, igniting her with a fluorescent violet glow. Reichardt's spectral daggers followed, disappearing straight through her and coming out the other side. Tangled within the crimson ribbons of his reaper was the black, writhing shape of the Whisperer. The hollow unfurled its body to dodge the attack, disentangling the swirling mass of its tail from the runner's shoulders. It sprang forward, the mists that made up its serpentine body spreading outwards to increase its size, like a lizard flaring its spines. Reichhardt backed off quickly as he pulled his first blade back in and used the second one to deflect the creature's strike as Alvaro rounded on it from the other side. The Swedish man's hammer hit home, sending the hollow spiraling towards the grass. It thrashed about on the ground, its unnatural body spinning in place as if it were in pain. A sharp cry was emitting from its form, though from this distance Finley couldn't tell if the thing even had a mouth in all that smoke and mist. The creature flipped itself over, launching its body like a rocket in the direction that the runner was headed. The shadow of its body quickly blended in with the cover of the trees.
For fun, helvete!
Alvaro swore, pointing after it.
Don't let it get away!
Reichhardt took after it with impressive speed, his slender body bending in unimaginable ways as he dodged through the overhanging branches. Finley leaped to his feet when he heard his name, glancing towards the broad form of Alvaro as he rushed past.
"Come on, Vannen! This way!"
he shouted. The silver-haired spirit hurried to fall in behind them, ducking under the tree cover as they pursued the dark, shadowy form on the path ahead.
Wait! Didn't Salo tell me to stay out of it? He shouted.
Forget what Salo said! You're learning on the job!
Alvaro hollered back.
Now, hurry up before that little creature makes it out of the park!
Finley had never really thought of himself as a runner. He was tall and lanky, built more like a college professor than an athlete. Thorne had always laughed at his attempts to get fit, told him that he was doomed to be an ectomorph forever, and that he might as well eat cake rather than spend half of his life wearing lycra. Chasing after the other spirits before sunrise in an English park, Finley thought that she might have had a point there. He currently felt less like a marathon runner and more like a child sprinting for the very first time on the school playground. The legs of the doll were clumsy and uncoordinated, and he let out a yelp as he tripped over a thick patch of grass, toppling off balance and into the surrounding hedges. He hissed through his teeth as he felt the sharp jabs of the bushes prickling along the parts where the sleeves of his jacket had been pushed up. Alvaro came to stand over him, yanking him to his feet by his hood.
"On your feet, Katunya!"
he said.
"Reichardt's got him cornered!"
The swirl of black mist came in abruptly from all sides, and Finley held his breath. He could feel the icy touch of the creature as it surrounded him, the voice looming everywhere all at once, as if it were invading every one of his senses. The black tendrils wound around his neck and his arms, latching on to him like a kraken trying to sink a ship.
"Worthless,"
the voice hissed from the nape of his neck.
"You should have gone on that boat. You are no use to anyone here."
Look at their faces, from around his shoulder. They pity you. Right inside his head. Thorn pitied you too. Light flickered in his peripheries as Reichardt's familiar face came into view. The crimson red of a ribbon slinked past, the blade slicing through the darkness that had encased him. He could see the fragments of sunshine that were breaking through, pink and orange with the dawn. Finley reached for the light, breaking through to topple down into the grass with a gasp. The first Amorini quickly placed himself between the hollow and its target. The sound of the creature's claws clashing with his blades echoed through the darkness.
"Now, Finley!"
Reichardt shouted.
"Get out of there!"
Finley slipped through the breaks in the smoke, rolling backwards just as Alvaro charged in with his hammer raised. The voices grew more intense as they looped around the attacking Amorini, as if they were in a room filled with loud music, and they had to shout to be heard. Nobody wants you here. You should be dead. Worthless. You can make it all stop. A gleaming blade flew past one final time, and then there was silence. The smoke began to dissipate, crawling up into the air to blend in with the slow-moving clouds. Warmth from the dawn washed over Finley's skin, and he exhaled a sigh when he met Reichardt's tired smile. The glasses sat askew on the bridge of his nose, his dark hair pushed back from his forehead in an untidy tangle, which he quickly corrected with one hand. He nodded in his direction.
"Behind you, Finley."
The younger man turned to meet the form of a second runner, one dressed in neon yellow and black. He remembered seeing her face on the news before, but the name hadn't quite stayed with him. There were cuts along her chin and throat, the knees of her capris torn and bloodied.
"You weren't trying to hurt that girl,"
Finley realized, stepping closer to the pale, lost soul in front of him.
"You were trying to warn her, weren't you?"
The runner's soul nodded. "It can be dangerous here in the dark," she agreed. "I didn't want her family to miss her the way mine do." Something felt tight in Finley's throat.
"You don't have to worry about her anymore,"
he found himself saying.
"She's going to make it home safe now, thanks to you."
He turned to direct her attention towards the far side of the park, where the runner in red was disappearing through the gates and towards the city center again. The lost soul smiled sadly to herself, the sunlight beginning to caress her dark hair as she watched the other woman go. "I'm glad," she breathed softly.
"You should go home too," Finley continued. "I'm sure you have family in the afterlife who can't wait to see you."
The woman's brown eyes sparkled as she turned her face towards the flickering street lamps, nodding as she chewed her bottom lip. "There are a few faces I'm excited to see." Shimmering like the surface of the water, her shape began to blur and fade away, becoming starlight that slowly rose into the air and disappeared. In her place, the sound of wind rustled through the fresh spring leaves, and the soft pink tulips swayed.
"Wow! Way to go, Catania!"
Finley jumped whenever he felt a hand clapping his shoulder, Alvaro bringing his grinning face in close to his.
"That was some going!" It appears our petit chaton is a natural empath, Reichardt noted with a smile. An empath? Finley questioned.
The exorcism is only one small part of the deal,
Alvaro started.
The other half of it is trying to convince the freed soul to move on to the afterlife.
Some spirits can be more difficult than others, the taller of the two cat-eared spirits commented, sliding both his reapers back into his pockets. You handled that very well, Finley.
Oh, I think he's blushing,
Alvaro teased, squeezing him tighter and roughing up his hair.
I am not,
the newest Amorini complained, swiping at him until he released his grip. He could already feel the heat moving up the back of his neck and into his ears. We should return to the others, Reichardt interrupted coolly, checking the watch on his wrist for the time. We will want to get back to Psychopomp Drive before the morning commute begins. The sound of the cathedral's bells began to ring out across the city, and Finley found himself watching the men's backs as they chatted and made their way back up towards the walls and the surrounding red brick buildings where the other two Amorini were waiting for their return. The smell of warm coffee poured freely from the nearby cafe, and he knew that the runner they had saved would be peeling off her trainers right about now, probably jumping into the shower before getting ready for work. Finley was certain that their days were only just beginning.
Wait for me,
he shouted, and jogged to keep up with the others, wondering what the rest of his day would bring. To be continued in Chapter 10.